Did you know that a lot of leather is actually coated in a layer of plastic? In the past, I had pretty much let the sustainability argument between vegan-friendly leathers and animal leathers pass me by because I just thought, well, animal leather comes from somebody's skin, and I think that's wrong and more than a little bit rude. I just thought, well, if it's that or a plastic leather, then give me the plastic leather because I just thought it was the lesser of two evils. So even if it is less sustainable, at least nobody has to die for it. It turns out that it is not nearly that simple and that leather is not even close to as sustainable as some people will have you think it is. The thing that really prompted me to look into this was that I was seeing people online. They would say things like, oh, well, I'm also against factory farming and exploiting animals, but leather is just a byproduct. So even people who were against animal suffering and exploitation seemed to think that leather was okay. And this set off alarm bells for me, and I figured we need to do some digging. So dig is what I did. I found out that it is actually more sustainable to just throw the skins from the animals used for their meat straight into the garbage rather than turn them into leather. I was shocked to learn that even the most common and yes, plastic vegan-friendly leather is 7 times more sustainable than animal-based leather. The calculation for the vegan plastic leather even includes end-of-life incineration, which the animal leather calculation doesn't even include. That's not even one of the more newfangled plant-based leathers. That's literally just polyurethane. So how can that be, you may ask? First things first, not all leather is made equally. So really quickly, the skin of an animal when removed from a large animal is referred to often as a hide, and from a smaller animal apparently it's called the skin, but I'm going to use hide and skin interchangeably just because at the end of the day I think hide is probably just like a sanitized word like pork, and it's skin. It's skin. Either way you slice it. I'm also going to be mostly talking about cow skin leather because that is most commonly produced, and also it is the one that is most commonly touted as sustainable, as people like to think of it as a byproduct of the meat and dairy industries. So when the skin is cut off of an animal, it has 2 sides. It has the top side, which is called the grain side, and it has the bottom side, which is called the flesh side. The slab of skin is not used in most applications in its entirety because it is too thick for most of the ways that people use leather. So it's cut the long way in half, and the top side is called the grain side, and the bottom side is called the split side. The word grain refers to this pattern, which is probably what most people think of when they think of what leather looks like. This is the part of the skin that is the most expensive and the most durable, as it is where the collagen protein fibers are the strongest and most densely arranged. Collagen is what skin is mostly made out of. There are 2 types of leather that contain the grain, and those are called top grain and full grain leather. Full grain leather is the most expensive type of leather because it includes the very top layer of the skin. Whereas in top grain leather, which is the second most expensive and durable type of skin, the top layer of the epidermis is sanded down with sandpaper in order to reduce the appearance of things like scars or bug bites. It basically evens out the texture. Full grain leather still shows marks like those scars and bug bites, and therefore only the skins with the fewest scars and markings are selected to be this type of leather. But both these have the grain, and again, it looks something like this. So the part that is cut off in the process of making that full and top grain leather is the bottom part, which is called split leather, aka the underside. So this is the part that would have been attached to the flesh. This type of leather is weaker than the top grain and the full grain leather because the collagen structures are not as strong in this part and is therefore considered a lower quality type of leather. Interestingly, this type of leather is often actually coated in a very thin layer of polyurethane that has this grain pattern stamped into it to mimic grain leather. This can be called genuine leather. This is also called die-cast leather, but most of the time it just is called leather because the companies don't want you to know that this is a lower quality cut of leather. And to create suede, you just take this type of leather and then they brush it out with some kind of abrasive texture to give it that fuzziness. Finally, we have bonded leather, which is basically the particle board of the leather world. So basically what that means is that they shred up a bunch of scraps and dust and they bond that together with latex or polyurethane. This can contain anywhere from 10 to 90% leather. Quick side note on genuine leather, if you basically replace the word genuine with actual and say it like actual leather, you kind of get the gist of what genuine leather is. It is made with the least durable, least flexible, lowest quality part of the hide, and sometimes literally just layers kind of like glued together, or again, sometimes it is that bi-cast leather with the polyurethane on the outside. So basically, you just have no idea what you're getting with genuine leather. So the main defense that I see people using for leather is that it is sustainable and will last forever and will outlive you, and it's durable. So I think we should take a look at the projected life expectancies for each of these types of leather. These estimates are for items that receive regular use, so that special suede handbag that you have sitting in your shelf for special occasions only that's been there for 25 years is not what we're talking about. Anything can last forever if you don't use it. So the first one is full grain leather. This one does last up to or over 100 years when cared for correctly. By the way, this is the only leather that will get that patina over time. Like sometimes you hear people who are obsessed with leather talk about the patina, and this is basically when the leather absorbs grease from your oily little fingers and it gets discolored, but in an artful way. It looks like this. That's patina. The second highest quality type of leather is the top grain leather. And remember, this is the one that's had the top layer sanded off to hide some of those imperfections. And this type of leather, when cared for correctly, will last from 5 to 20 years. Next is the split leather, which remember is the lower quality, weaker cut of the leather that comes from underneath the grain leathers. And this is what suede is made out of, and sometimes it has that polyurethane layer on top with the grain pattern stamped into it. And this type of leather will last from 5 to 7 years when cared for correctly. And finally, we have that bonded leather, which remember is the leather scraps that are blended together and then glued together. And this leather is usually estimated to last up to 3 years. So the actual part of the skin that the leather is made out of is not the only thing that affects its longevity. The way the item is dyed, tanned, and finished also affect the finished leather or item's texture and water resistance. So the tanning process is what happens after all the flesh is removed and the hair. And tanning does not mean leaving them stretched out in the sun for a few days, which is definitely not what I thought for a portion of my life. It is, in fact, a highly intensive chemical bath that fundamentally alters the skin. Basically, the tanning process stabilizes the proteins so that the skin doesn't decay, because it is literally skin that has been cut off of a living animal and would, under regular circumstances, decompose. The word tan comes from tannins, which is an acid that comes from some plants. It was historically used for leather tanning and still is used in a process called vegetable tanning, which we will talk about a little bit later. However, over 90% of leather today is chrome tanned. This means that the chemical that the leather is soaked and tanned in is chromium sulfate. It creates a softer, more flexible, and more water-resistant leather than vegetable tanning does. Tanning only takes about a day to complete, but it is very bad for the environment and for human rights. A huge amount of leather is tanned outside of Europe and the United States due to more lax environmental laws. Treating the chromium waste turns the chromium from a less toxic version into a highly toxic version that is often improperly discarded and basically just dumped out of these tanneries into the streets, which then contaminates all the nearby water.
That's chromium. That's the chemical coming out of the factory. And this water is then goes straight into the river, the main river in Bangladesh, where people fish, get their shrimp, and they're ingesting this chemical.
This also causes a huge amount of health problems to the extent that there are entire villages in China where a huge amount of leather is produced and tanned. There are actual villages that are referred to as cancer villages because of the extremely high rates of cancer that the tanning chemicals cause. Not to mention the natural ecosystems and animals who also depend on these water sources. So now you may be asking, well, why don't we just use vegetable tanning if chrome tanning is so bad? So vegetable tanning can often take up to 2 months to complete and is also considered an artisanal process. It also results in a product that is a lot stiffer and a lot more sensitive to water than the chrome tan leather is. For this reason, 100%, or at least very close to it, of leather clothing is chrome tanned. Vegetable tanned alternative is too stiff and is simply too sensitive to be exposed to the wear and tear that clothing gets exposed to. Less than 10% of leather is vegetable tanned because it simply does not meet the needs of what the average person is looking for in their leather item. I'd like to take a moment now to point out, in case someone's missed it, that the entire point of the tanning process is to take an organic material and turn it inorganic. We are taking something that is designed to decompose and making it so that it does not decompose. Natural to unnatural. It is literally a preservation process to stop it from decomposing. Not to mention the finishing process, which ends up with a lot of leather being covered in a thin layer of plastic.
Most people don't realize, and this is like a little bit of a truth bomb that I'm going to drop on people, most animal-derived leather is literally coated in plastic as well.
More on that later. So, chrome tanned leather comes out like a light bluish gray color, and vegetable tanned leather comes out like a brownish tan color. But I'm sure that we've all seen leather in every color of the rainbow. So, how does it get that way? So leather is typically dyed with something called an aniline dye. That can be any color. So these aniline dyes penetrate all the way through the leather. It's more like staining wood. So like when you stain it, it kind of soaks in and you can still see the natural finish of the wood. So basically these dyes will saturate the leather, and the higher quality leathers that we talked about, like the full grain leather, are often left at this step because you can still see all of the imperfections on the top of the leather at this stage. Stretch marks, bug bites, scars, all still visible. This has been said to give the leather more character, which pro or con, depending on how you look at it and how creepy of an individual you are. So if you scratch this type of leather, you probably know what I'm talking about, the color will change. Leather that is left at this stage is called aniline leather. And again, this is the most expensive type of leather that we're talking about. Usually it is paired with that full grain. The hair follicles will still be visible on this type of leather. So again, pores are the hair follicles, and it looks like this. This is where it gets very interesting and easily where I spent the majority of my time researching it, because they're trying very, very, very hard to not give clear information about this. It's called pigmented leather. I saw in several sources that this is the most common type of leather. So if you've had leather, it's probably been this type. So this is basically where leather, either pre-dyed with the aniline dyes or undyed, is covered in a layer of pigment or dye. The layer of pigment or dye can be a varying intensity or thickness depending on the effect that you're going for, and they are also then covered in a thin top coat. So you can think of, if aniline dyeing is staining the wood, you can think of this one as painting the wood. And what do you do with something that's painted? You seal it with a top coat. This top coat will help protect the leather from things like UV fading, water stains, and just general scratches and wear. And on this type of leather, you can see that the pores are filled in. All those little holes are less visible or completely invisible depending on the thickness of that pigment. So this is where things got really strange. I did a lot of digging because the word pigment was confusing to me. Pigment to me means paint. Well, pigment by definition is just like something like a color. So I was really curious to figure out what this pigment was made out of, because I think pigment, I think paint. And paint often means plastic, like acrylic paint. When I tell you it is extremely challenging, like they will not tell you, they use the word pigment like their life depends on it, which it very well might. Like they're playing the floor is lava, but with the word plastic. The thing is, you can't just put a pigment on, like a pigment has to be suspended in something. Like, I suspect it's acrylic or some kind of plastic base.
Pigmented leather, also known as top-coated leather, is the most widely used finishing technique. The finish consists of an opaque base coat of pigmented resins followed by a protective top coat. It is ideal for high-use items like furniture or automotive seats.
I did find several sources that heavily alluded, and one that outright stated that this pigment coating is basically plastic. However, what I was able to confirm with some more certainty is the fact that this very thin plastic top coat does get applied to pigmented leathers, because like I said, when you paint something, you put that plastic top coat on to seal it and protect it. And the same is true, it seems, with leather. Couches, for example, and all car leather is also coated in plastic because, again, car seat leather gets a lot of very heavy use, and this plastic coating makes it a lot more durable. So that actually helped me understand exactly how deceptive this plastic coating situation can be, because I've touched plenty of leather car seats in my life. I just thought that that was leather. It never occurred to me that there was plastic on there. So that helped me calibrate to what that plastic coating might feel like. Same thing for like leather jackets, because like I said, if leather gets wet, it is basically ruined a lot of the time. It's a highly sensitive material that should really only be cared for with certain conditioners and cleaners. Like, you're not even supposed to clean aniline leather, that's that leather that only has that one type of dye on it, with like a damp cloth. It's that sensitive. It will warp, and when it dries, it'll get brittle and you'll get a bunch of water stains on it. Again, just like with the chrome tanning, we are taking what once was a natural product. We have introduced an extremely toxic chemical to it that basically takes a ton of the natural properties out of it, and now we're covering a ton of it in a coat of plastic. Legally, leather producers do not have to disclose that coating of plastic if it comes in under a certain thickness. And in the case that the plastic coating does exceed that thickness, it is called coated leather, and patent leather does often fall into this coated leather category. A good way that you can kind of tell if a leather has been coated is by putting a drop of water on it, and if it absorbs, it is likely uncoated or has a very thin coating. But if it beads up or doesn't absorb, that is most likely leather that is covered in a top coat of plastic. Or it's the die-cast / polyurethane leather, which is still coated in plastic in a different way than we're talking about right now. You can also tell if it's like really shiny leather. So these sofas, for example, are pigmented and they do have that plastic top coat on them. Basically, if the leather feels smooth, it's probably coated in plastic, very thin layer. And if it's not coated, it's gonna have like a dry kind of chalky feel, like it'll have more texture to it. So what I'm getting at here is that a lot of leather is coated in plastic, which I think that a lot of people do not know. However, not only pigmented leather gets this plastic top coat. I also found out that sometimes the aniline leather that we talked about, the most expensive type, the top grain stuff, the full grain, also gets this top coat, because like we talked about, that kind of leather is extremely sensitive. So even if you're buying top of the line aniline full grain leathers, it very well might still have a plastic top coat on it. Most leather is just a preserved piece of material that is then covered in some form of plastic. If it isn't, it requires very specialized care and is very expensive to begin with. I don't think that this is the type of leather that the average consumer is talking about when they're saying that leather is sustainable and long-lasting. It seems likely that the average consumer is buying lower quality leather that is covered in a bunch of stuff that they don't understand and defending it as though it were that full grain aniline leather that is theoretically capable of lasting 100 years. I'd also like to point out that in most cases, people don't use the exact same handbag for their entire lifetime. It's not like they buy a $500 full grain aniline leather bag that's vegetable tanned, and then they use it until they die, and then when they die, they hand it off to another person who happened to want that exact same bag. Like, realistically, that is absolutely not how fashion today works. We're all probably aware of how extremely frivolous and fast the fashion cycles are of the fast fashion industry, and leather products are not exempt from this. The vast majority of leather is not purchased as an investment and then meticulously cared for indefinitely. All you have to do is go to any thrift store and look at the aisles upon aisles and piles upon piles of discarded leather goods and accessories and clothing. And another note to people who swear by leather, congratulations. If it's as awesome of a product as you like to say it is, well, presumably you already own some leather things and thereby never need to buy any more ever again because it lasts so long. So, enjoy. Get your leather shoes infinitely repaired and use the same handbag till you die. Now I want to talk about leather as a byproduct. Whether leather is a byproduct or a co-product is hotly debated, and I honestly don't think it's that relevant of a distinction to make. But I do fall more on the side of thinking that leather is a co-product because, as far as I understand it, something becomes a co-product once it becomes desired and profitable, which leather certainly is. What's more important than understanding if leather is a co-product or a byproduct is recognizing that globally, leather is a $419 billion industry. Over 23 billion square feet of leather are produced every year. Churning out this much preserved animal skin that comes from the most environmentally damaging industries on the planet simply cannot be sustainable. So as I mentioned in the intro to this video, throwing the unprocessed or like unleatherified cow skins straight out of the slaughterhouse into the garbage is more sustainable than turning it into leather. And this isn't even accounting for the fact that one day it too will reach the end of its useful life and will then again either end up in a landfill like it would if we just put it there in the first place, or will be incinerated. Everything gets thrown away someday, and all we're doing in the case of leather is adding a middle step that actually just makes it much slower to decompose. The meat and dairy industries is where most skin used for leather comes from. These are widely recognized to be some of the most environmentally harmful industries. In fact, if you care about sustainability and the environment at all, yet you choose to support industries like these, even indirectly, if we can even call buying leather indirectly supporting these industries, your actions don't align very well with your beliefs. Maybe at this point you're thinking, well, if we make 23 billion square feet of leather every year, presumably we'd have to replace these 23 billion square feet of something with something else. So even if we buy the byproduct argument and we only start calculating the CO2 emissions from when the leather goes to the tannery, as opposed to including all of the environmental damage that happens from raising and slaughtering the animal, the emissions for leather per square meter are 17 kilograms of CO2, and for artificial leather, it is only 15.8. Thereby, if we replaced all 23 billion square feet of cowskin leather with polyurethane leather, it would still be better for the environment. Next, I want to talk about the vegan-friendly alternatives. And as I get into this section, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that even if the leather that did come from these skins of animals was more sustainable, it wouldn't actually matter, because it is not up to innocent animals to bear the burden of the fact that humans have trashed the planet. For example, if I found out that something about you and your family's DNA meant that your skin was the most beautiful, sustainable, environmentally friendly material on the planet, it would not justify killing you and turning you into leather. Nor would it justify breeding more of you to get more of your magical, sustainable skin. In fact, you would tell me I'm crazy and very reasonably file a restraining order. Same is true for animals, except they cannot file restraining orders. That's part of the problem. However, as a nice little bonus, it turns out that vegan-friendly leathers are more sustainable and environmentally friendly than animal-based leathers. So, the most common type of vegan leather that is the most widespread is polyurethane. You may also have noticed that it is often used in production of some of the types of leather that we were talking about earlier. And yes, it is plastic. However, as I established in the beginning of this video, polyurethane leather is still 7 times more sustainable than animal skin. This calculation actually includes end-of-life incineration for the polyurethane and not for the leather. So this means that if we calculated in that sort of end-of-life CO2 impact for the leather, like that incineration or the landfill decomposition, the numbers would actually come out even more in favor of polyurethane. So basically, for every single leather item you buy, you could buy 7 polyurethane items. I'm not recommending that, but I think it kind of puts it into perspective. Polyurethane is considered a relatively environmentally friendly material as far as plastics goes, as it doesn't release any highly toxic chemicals during its production. You can also buy items that are made out of recycled polyurethane to further reduce the environmental footprint. Of course, plastic is not the picture of sustainability, but it is still more sustainable, and the most important thing, it is far, far less cruel than animal skin. Basically, it starts as a liquid and then it gets poured onto these molds that have oftentimes that leather grain pattern on them. And then when it firms up, it's like a flexible sheet that can be used much as leather is used. For example, I have this polyurethane mouse pad. I don't think I'm going to be able to show the grain texture that it has imprinted on the camera. It's very flexible, it's very thin. I've also had this for like a while and it looks as new as the day I bought it. It can be any color, it can be any texture, and it is very flexible and it is far more water resistant than animal leather is. It is also much easier to clean and to care for. So just like we looked at those lifetime estimates for the different types of leather, I tried to find one for the polyurethane leather, but there isn't nearly as much data. I saw several estimates that said 3 to 5 years, one said 1 to 7, and a couple that said 10 plus. So I guess between like 1 and 10 plus years, likely depending on the quality of care that you take of it, as well as just the quality of the item in the first place. So it is equal to or better than the bonded leather and then the split or genuine leather, and is within the range of the top grain leather, which is the second highest quality of animal leather. So for example, if you were to go to like a fast fashion store and you have an option between a polyurethane bag and a leather bag, it's actually very likely that the polyurethane bag will outlast the low quality leather bag. It's also worth mentioning that a great way to make anything more sustainable is to buy it secondhand, and there are tons of vegan secondhand purses or leather goods available on secondhand markets like Poshmark or eBay or OfferUp or probably Facebook Marketplace, and it is always worth checking because I've seen some amazing deals on some of these bags. Something that I was also wondering about is the repairability of these vegan versus non-vegan leathers, and so I called my local leather repair / shoe repair shop and I asked if they repair polyurethane leather, and he was like, of course, in a way that made me feel stupid. So that is another thing that I think, maybe I'm projecting, but I think a lot of people might not know that you can actually have polyurethane and vegan-friendly leather items repaired at leather repair shops. I tend to take things pretty literally, so if I see leather repair, I just assume it means like cow leather or animal leather. So that's definitely a development that I think could also help with the longevity of some of these vegan or polyurethane leather items, is just having them repaired. I want to make a quick note on PVC, as in pipes and vinyl, because this was something that was used as a leather alternative for a while. However, it is very toxic due to the use of chlorine in its production and the fact that it releases dioxins as a result of that. It is considered very toxic to humans and the environment and is all around a bad choice. I would still like to point out though that vegans have never been the driving force, and PVC / vinyl is used in tons of applications, and vegans never have been and likely never will be the driving force of creating demand for PVC. For example, Doc Martens uses PVC in the soles of their shoes, whether they're vegan or non-vegan. So if you're thinking, well, I just don't like plastic, ignoring the fact that, of course, tons of leather is coated in plastic to some degree, there are plenty of low or no plastic vegan-friendly leather alternatives coming to the market. For example, there is apple leather, which is made of 50% polyurethane and 50% of discarded apple fibers. There's also cactus leather, mango leather, and pineapple leather. There is also a leather made out of mushrooms called mycelium, as well as a material that I believe is pronounced mirum or myrum, I don't know, but that is also 100% plastic free. These materials are not as common, but I have definitely seen some designers who are working with them. There is also cork, which has been becoming more popular, and that is literally made from the bark of a tree. Not to mention the fact that there are varying qualities of polyurethane and vegan leathers, exactly like there are varying qualities of animal-based leathers. For example, Stella McCartney is a high-end luxury vegetarian fashion designer, and she uses a blend of polyurethane and polyester in a lot of her bags, in addition to experimenting with zero plastic versions. And this is a very high quality material. So interestingly, Lexus has actually developed their own brand of vegan-friendly synthetic leather for their seats. It's called New Lux. It's very hard to find information on this, and I stopped short of actually calling a Lexus dealership and asking them, but maybe I still will. So in lieu of that, let us refer to some Reddit comments. So I actually did end up calling Lexus, and the first person I called at the dealership was not able to tell me what the New Lux material is made out of. They didn't even have it on their special employee info website. So then I called customer service, who was also not able to tell me what was in it, but they were able to refer me to somebody on the product team who actually has the New Lux in his car, but also didn't know what it was made of, but he wasn't able to access some kind of information that did end up telling him that it was made out of PVC, which is kind of surprising. And he wasn't able to tell me more than that, but we do know that it is in fact a PVC base. But let's listen to those Reddit comments anyways. I have New Lux in my RX, and you cannot tell that it's not real leather if I don't tell you. It's way better than the faux leather from the Europeans. Plus, I've been told it's more durable than leather. Also, leather is great, but it does come with significant downsides. It's harder to care for, more vulnerable to temperature changes and cracking, and also dye transfer. I have white New Lux, and it resists dye transfer. Parentheses. Blue jeans and white seeds do not mix well. Close parentheses. I still like leather for the smell, but I have to say, New Lux made me a believer. So aside from the fact that I question the sanity of anyone who opts for white car seats, these paint a picture of a reasonable product. I also learned about a product called Alcantara, which is just like the Stella McCartney bags, a blend of polyurethane and polyester. It's the fuzzy stuff that Microsoft uses on like the insides of the Microsoft Surface, and I believe it is also what is on like the back of this iPad case. Again, it kind of looks like suede, but it's basically just very soft. It is made in Italy, and companies like Porsche and Lamborghini actually use it in their cars because it is a lot lighter than leather, and I read that in the case of Lamborghini, they were actually able to make one of their cars lighter by 11 pounds by switching to this Alcantara fabric. So if something is good enough for Porsche and Lamborghini, I think it's probably good enough for the average consumer. Here's a side note on luxury cars that I discovered unpleasantly, is that Rolls-Royce has only ever produced vehicles that have leather interiors, and they only use leather from bulls because that's male cows, because they don't like the stretch marks that female cow skins sometimes have. And there's just so much to unpack there. I don't know where to start, and we're gonna move along, but you can think on that. All that got me thinking, why do people hold leather in such high regard when it is so easy to figure out that polyurethane plastic, arguably the worst kind of vegan leather alternative, is more sustainable, and there are tons of instances of luxury vegan leather alternatives. Firstly, I think there is the false idea of the leather industry being the sort of neutral entity that is just rescuing these waste products and turning them into something that's usable. People are comfortable with it because they think it is a byproduct, and them buying it doesn't actually make a difference, as opposed to recognizing them for what they actually are, which is a massive, over $400 billion industry that has significant interest in getting you to buy leather products and is willing to use misleading marketing and language to get you to do just that, just like other animal agriculture industries. Secondly, until about 10 years ago, leather kind of was as good as it got when it came to long-lasting materials. Like, it's been used for 7,000 years. Therefore, a lot of high-end designers ended up using leather because there's supposed to be some kind of beacon of quality. Thereby, leather got associated with luxury, quality, and most importantly, status. Think about Birkin handbags or the red-bottomed shoes or a Gucci belt. They're all leather. In addition, maybe we've seen some of our grandparents' or great-grandparents' leather goods that have survived the test of time and have been passed down from a time where leather manufacture and care was more of a craft than the industrialized machine than it is today. These items come from a time where proper leather care and maintenance was more of a necessity, not to mention just the survivorship bias that we project onto these items. Now, in the relative future, we do have vegan-friendly leather alternatives that rival or even exceed the quality of some of these real leather goods. But we as a society haven't caught up yet, and we still associate non-animal leather with the low-quality pleather of the recent past. So now the average person who wants to project an image of status or luxury, wants to purchase sustainably, or just wants to own a quality item will turn up their nose at something like a vegan-friendly leather, despite the fact that the leather that they're buying likely isn't what they think it is. All this made me kind of curious about lab-grown leather because it seems like something that I'm surprised doesn't exist yet. I mean, I guess it makes sense that there is just such an excess of animal skins through like the meat and dairy industries that there isn't necessarily a demand for lab-grown leather yet. But I did find a company that does specialize in it. I couldn't actually figure out if they have actually made leather yet, and they also didn't respond to my email where I asked them that, but they're backed by Leonardo DiCaprio, so I don't know, maybe that means something. Who knows? So lab-grown leather does seem to almost solve the animal cruelty problem, because they say that they only take one small sample from a cow who doesn't notice it, but I actually think there's an easier way around this, which is obviously to just use human DNA. I see absolutely no reason why, if we're already doing lab-grown leather, why we're not eating it, nobody's gonna eat this, we might as well just use human skin. It completely solves the consent issue, the exploitation issue, because humans can give consent. I think that lab-grown leather has a better chance of taking off than lab-grown meat, because I think that there won't be like the same ick factor of eating it. Like, probably if we go with my human skin idea, there will be like a decent amount of resistance, but fundamentally I think it could be easier to shift. I don't actually know about the environmental impact of lab-grown leather versus like an animal-based leather. I wasn't able to find a lot about that, but I do still think it's an interesting avenue to think about. So I want to ask, why leather in the first place? Because I also kind of fall into this. Like, I really do like the look of like a leather handbag or a leather accessory. I used to have a leather belt. I feel like there's a lot of potential in the idea of just shirking leather altogether if we need to. For example, cotton is right there. Sure, I know that cotton is not the most sustainable of materials, but it is literally made out of a plant, and there are more sustainable ways of growing cotton, like rain-fed cotton, for example. It is better than both plastic and animal leather. And for those people who like the patina that animal leather gets, there is something called waxed cotton that I was really interested to learn about. It is basically exactly what it sounds like. It is usually a heavier weight canvas that is then coated in wax. So it's like you'll put the wax on it and then you melt it. You won't have to do this, somebody else will do it for you, but you can do it yourself. And this basically creates a flexible, water-resistant material, just like leather is, that will develop sort of those creases and textures as you use it. It is almost always waxed with vegan-friendly materials, like they don't typically use beeswax, but always double check. There's also just like your average canvas tote. Not to mention that there are plenty of bags that are made out of canvas that have cuter designs than just a canvas tote. And as far as belts go, like this is my belt. It is made out of cotton. It is canvas. It looks as new as the day I bought it. Like, sure, it's not very stylish, I'll grant you that, but it works. And almost certainly you'd probably be able to find something that is just sort of this canvas strip that has more traditional like belt buckle, but I mean, it's so functional. And not leather of any kind. This brings me to a very interesting fact that I learned that I think a lot of people will also find interesting, and that is that this bag is not made out of leather. It is made of coated canvas, which is literally canvas that is coated in plastic, and it is often used by high-end designers or anybody really who wants a print, because apparently it is very challenging to print on leather. So they will instead print on cotton canvas and then coat that to give it that shiny, water-resistant look. Of course, the trim on this bag is still made out of leather, but I found out that it is very common for these handles to crack or become discolored, and they often get replaced several times throughout the bag's lifetime. So it would be very easy to replace that with polyurethane or even more coated canvas or like a nylon or something, and there you have it, like a vegan handbag. So coating things in plastic is obviously also not the picture of sustainability, but I do think that this is likely a very underutilized option, especially if it's being used for handbags that are luxury and that expensive. I don't know why there aren't more. Frankly, the vast majority of us simply do not require leather in our day-to-day lives. It is not a necessity. So to the people who still reject vegan-friendly leathers for whatever reason, perhaps you just ought not use any leather at all. I could maybe believe that there are like one or two highly specific situations in which technological advancements haven't created a material that will perform as well as leather does. Like while I was researching, I thought that maybe motorcycle gear would meet this criteria because I know that's often used to protect riders from falls, road rash. And I actually found that there are several vegan-friendly options for motorcycle gear, and riding a motorcycle is not really a necessity anyways. Even if there is like a very specific purpose, like where one person needs a leather glove, it simply does not justify the mass slaughter and use of a bunch of sentient animals' skin. Basically, climate change is a human-created issue, and it is completely backwards to think it's okay to use the skins of non-consenting animals as a material under the guise of sustainability. I highly encourage you to get curious and explore all the different options that are out there, because there are more than you think there are. There are shoes, there are jackets, there are bags, there are briefcases, there is luggage, toiletry kits, jewelry cases, literally anything you can think of has been made in some form of animal-friendly leather. And if you're anywhere near like a higher end department store, I highly encourage you to go check out those Stella McCartney bags. They feel incredible. I'm not really endorsing that sort of high fashion world. I think there's a lot wrong with it, but I think it's also silly to deny the fact that high-end luxury fashion plays a role in society, and there are a lot of people who are really invested in that, and I think it's great that there are options for people like that. And again, if you do care about the environment or sustainability, I would highly encourage you to not support any animal agriculture, including leather. And as a final reminder, veganism is not about sustainability, it is about not supporting the exploitation of non-human animals. Sustainability is often a positive side effect of living a vegan life, but it is not the focus. So I'll gladly stand by pleather as long as it means no animals get hurt. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for watching. And as always, stay mindful, eat fruit, and don't multiply. And I'll see you in the next video.